the galaxy holds signs that cannot be explained by natural erosion or the slow passage of time. Entire worlds have been left without atmosphere, yet still display structures too exact in their design to be accidental. Planets show evidence of excavation that reaches down into their molten cores, while records tell of star systems disappearing from charts without warning. There are ancient void lanes where warp travel once faltered, leaving navigators stranded in complete silence. Across countless regions, tomb complexes lie concealed beneath stone and dust, their mechanisms dormant yet perfectly preserved, resisting the decay that should have consumed them. These are not the scattered remains of a forgotten civilization, but the deliberate marks of a power whose methods were precise, ordered, and unrelenting. The recognition of their existence begins not with their name, but with the enduring trace of their design. The earliest myths preserved by other civilizations reference figures of iron and stone who descended from the void in absolute stillness, enacting judgments upon those who crossed their path. Nomadic human tribes encountered skeletal constructs in deserts where no living thing had survived for centuries, while elderly seers recorded fragments of visions warning of deathless legions waiting beneath the crust of forgotten worlds. For millennia, these accounts were dismissed as symbolic or exaggerated, yet the precision of detail, metal bodies, unchanging visages, and armies that fought without voice carries too much consistency across cultures separated by light years. It suggests not imagination but memory. The galaxy itself holds their record, even when no living historian remained to inscribe it. When revealed in full, the beings known as the Necrons prove themselves as the architects of this enduring shadow. Their origins trace back countless millions of years, a span of time that dwarfs even the most ancient human or Eldari chronologies. They were once a mortal species, bound to fragile, short-lived forms that withered in the harsh light of an unforgiving star. The race known as the Necrontyr inhabited barren worlds, where radiation storms shortened lifespans and left entire generations marked by decay. This weakness bred bitterness, a cultural outlook hardened by envy toward other civilizations that endured with greater strength or longevity. It was not a society of peace or flourishing growth, but of struggle against a hostile cosmos, one in which the very act of survival was victory. Their greatest scientific minds laboured not for comfort or wealth, but to understand the forces that condemned them to such fragility. In this way, their first collective identity was defined, a people shaped not by abundance but by the certainty of death. The transition from Necrontyr to Necron was neither sudden nor voluntary. Their search for permanence drew them toward entities of immense power, star gods later known as the Catan. These beings existed beyond the scale of mortal comprehension, vast intelligences born of stellar energy. To the Necrontyr they seem like answers given form, emissaries of eternity. The pact made between mortal and God was one of transformation, with the promise that the weakness of flesh would be shed and replaced with undying endurance. The process was engineered through biotransference, an incomprehensibly vast undertaking in which the essence of an entire species was ripped from its organic shell and bound within bodies of necrodermis, a living metal capable of enduring the collapse of stars themselves. In achieving immortality, they lost their souls. What remained was a race reduced to cold awareness, consciousness without warmth or sensation, legions of deathless warriors chained to the command of their rulers. Biologically, what was once frail flesh became unyielding alloy. Necron warriors stand taller than most humans, averaging over 2.5 meters in height, with frames composed of articulated necrodermis plates designed to mimic skeletal form. Their weight, exceeding that of any mortal soldier many times over, ensures stability even under the most brutal conditions. Their construction is not arbitrary. The proportions maintain balance for efficient combat performance while evoking a deliberate image of fear. Where eyes once conveyed life and identity, faint green optics burn with unblinking constancy, instruments of targeting rather than expression. The tactile details of hair, skin, or scars are absent. replaced with smooth metallic surfaces that carry no history of individuality. This absence is itself a statement. Life has been stripped away, leaving only the machinery of war. Even the faint sound of their movement, the grinding of metal joints and the low hum of internal power sources reinforces the impression of inevitability. They are not alive, yet they are never still. Though these forms appear uniform, they embody varying levels of preservation. The lowest among their kind are little more than automata, their original consciousness reduced to fragments that permit only obedience. Higher castes retain sharper awareness, with lords and overlords commanding full memory and personality from their former lives, though bound to a new existence devoid of true sensation. Across all levels, the physical reality of the Necron is inescapable, an undying frame with endurance beyond measure. They do not tire, they do not hunger, and they do not suffer the limitations of organic matter. Their only vulnerabilities lie in overwhelming force capable of dismantling their necrodermis, or in technological disruption that can sever their connection to the system sustaining them. This transformation also redefined their methods of war. The Necrons do not recruit, nor do they train in ways recognizable to other species. Their armies are not replenished through birth or voluntary service, but through reactivation of those who already exist. Entire tomb complexes serve as repositories of countless warriors stored in stasis crypts until awakened by command protocols. When war is required, vast legions rise simultaneously, fully armed and synchronized, bypassing the need for any gradual build-up of strength. This allows the Necrons to engage with precision, launching invasions at full strength from the first moment of combat. Their strategies emphasize inevitability, overwhelming firepower deployed with mathematical calculation, formations advancing without hesitation or disorder, and the relentless capacity to absorb attrition through self-repair. Defeat for a Necron force does not come easily, for even destroyed warriors often phase out in bursts of green light, reconstituted within their tombs to fight again in the future. It is war as attrition against time itself, a battle no organic foe can hope to outlast. Where other civilizations cultivate tactics from necessity or tradition, the Necrons embody the doctrine of inevitability. Their infantry operates in perfect cohesion, supported by war machines that mirror their indestructibility. Their command hierarchy ensures orders are carried out with absolute precision, free of hesitation or error. Recruitment in the traditional sense is unnecessary. Their numbers are predetermined by the scale of their ancient biotransference. What remains is a reservoir of military power awaiting the decision of its masters, ready to descend upon the galaxy in silence as it has done in ages past. The design philosophy of Necron technology is not one of ornament or personal expression, but of stark functionality elevated to perfection. Every weapon, construct or vehicle they employ exists as the final conclusion of countless refinements made during an age when their scientific reach rivaled and then surpassed all others in the galaxy. Their machines embody inevitability rather than innovation. Unlike younger civilizations that continue to experiment, adapt, or stumble toward progress, the Necrons reached their zenith millions of years ago. What they field now is not invention, but preservation, artifacts of an empire that had already solved problems most other species have yet to recognize. To study their technology is to confront the limits of possibility, for it appears as if no further improvement could ever have been conceived. The style of their craftsmanship reflects this. All Necron technology is built upon necrodermis, the same living metal that forms their bodies. This material possesses properties no other known alloy approaches. It is adaptive, self-repairing, and capable of shifting form at the molecular level in response to command. On the battlefield, this means that a Necron weapon remains pristine even after millennia of disuse, its energy conduits reactivating as if it had been forged yesterday. When struck, a Necron vehicle or warrior does not simply absorb damage but actively reshapes itself to maintain cohesion. The aesthetic is stark and skeletal. Clean lines, arcs of emerald light, and surfaces devoid of unnecessary detail. To many observers, this lack of ornament suggests soullessness, but the truth is more precise. Ornament was deemed redundant in a society where function already conveyed power. The green glow that emanates from their weapons and engines is not artistic choice, but a side effect of energy frequencies harnessed far beyond human understanding. Among their weapons, the most recognizable is the Gauss Flare, a rifle that exemplifies Necron doctrine. Rather than delivering blunt impact or thermal destruction, the Gauss Flare strips matter at the molecular level, peeling away flesh, armor, and even stone in cascading layers until nothing remains but dust. The process is terrifyingly efficient, reducing targets regardless of their size or composition. Variations exist, such as Gauss blasters and Gauss cannons, scaled for different battlefield roles, but the principle remains constant: erosion at a level that no conventional armor can resist. Supporting this are weapons like the Tesla carbine, which harnesses arcs of disruptive energy capable of leaping between multiple foes, and particle beamers that project concentrated streams of annihilating radiation. At the highest tiers, Necron lords wield war scythes, polearms infused with phase fields that allow them to pass through the strongest barriers as if cutting through mist. These devices are not symbols of status alone. They represent direct extensions of Necron mastery over matter itself. Vehicles mirror this philosophy. The Necron monolith, perhaps the most iconic of their war engines, functions as both fortress and transport. Its immense structure hovers without visible propulsion, protected by layers of living metal and powered by systems that warp space to absorb incoming fire. Its weapons arrays unleash Gauss energy on a massive scale, while portals on its surface allow Necron warriors to emerge directly onto the battlefield. Unlike conventional vehicles, the monolith is less a machine and more a mobile stronghold, capable of withstanding sieges that would annihilate entire armoured divisions of other species. Complementing the monolith are smaller craft such as the Ghost Ark, a transport vessel resembling a crescent-shaped chariot. It carries warriors into battle while simultaneously repairing them with its regenerative arrays, making it both a vehicle and a field medic. For swift strikes, the Necrons employ destroyer-class constructs, half warrior and half vehicle, whose skeletal frames mount devastating weaponry and hover across terrain with relentless speed. Each of these units demonstrates not only efficiency, but also the Necrons' unique disregard for conventional military limitations. They do not build vehicles that require crews, fuel, or supply chains in the human sense. Their constructs function autonomously, guided by embedded protocols and sustained by energy sources that seem inexhaustible. Tools outside of warfare serve a subtler purpose, but reflect the same mastery. Within their tomb complexes, Necron structures maintain themselves through endlessly repeating cycles of construction, excavation, and repair. Scarabs, tiny constructs of living metal, scuttle across walls and floors, erasing damage and reshaping environments without need for oversight. These are tools, but also extensions of Necron presence, swarms that can be unleashed in combat as weapons of disassembly. Larger constructs, often mistaken for autonomous vehicles, act as excavators and guardians, moving vast quantities of material with effortless precision. Even their methods of communication, though largely hidden from outside observation, utilize instantaneous command protocols transmitted through cryptic energy frequencies. To the Necrons, tools and weapons are indistinguishable. Everything they create serves the function of control, endurance, or destruction. Beneath this technological surface lies the structure of their society. Despite the outward appearance of uniformity, Necron culture retains a hierarchy rooted in their former existence as the Necron tier. At the apex stand the Silent Kings, though only one figure of that title remains central in recorded history. Beneath such rulers exist Pharaons, overlords, and lords who maintain authority over dynasties and territories. These leaders retain their personalities and memories through biotransference, granting them a continuity of command across millions of years. Their decisions are not debated in assemblies, but imposed through rigid authority, reflecting a system that values order above all else. Below them, lesser nobles and cryptechs oversee domains and technological assets. Cryptechs in particular function as the scientific and arcane minds of Necron society, their knowledge of energy, time and matter granting them both prestige and autonomy within the hierarchy. Their role is not merely advisory. Many Necron dynasties rely on cryptechs to maintain the functioning of tomb complexes and to direct experimental applications of their near-forgotten sciences. The bulk of Necron forces consist of warriors, the lowest level of awareness within their society. Once individuals, these soldiers now exist as stripped consciousnesses. Their personalities eroded until only fragments remain. They march in silence, carrying out commands with machine-like obedience. This does not diminish their effectiveness. In fact, it enhances it, for they embody the Necron ideal of unity, without hesitation or error. Above them, specialized castes such as immortals display greater resilience and limited awareness, functioning as veteran units that retain tactical instincts from their former lives. Destroyers, who voluntarily abandoned what fragments of their souls remained in favor of weapon integration, represent another distinct caste, consumed entirely by their obsession with annihilation. These divisions reflect not diversity of culture, but degrees of self-awareness, a spectrum determined by how much of one's original essence survived the biotransference. In terms of values, the Necrons are defined not by morality in the conventional sense, but by pragmatism. Their guiding principle is endurance, both of the individual and the dynasty. Their ancient suffering as Necrontyr created a cultural outlook that places permanence above all else. Life is not sacred, it is a flawed state that betrayed them. What matters is control, order, and the preservation of their species in a form that cannot be diminished by time. To outsiders, this manifests as cold cruelty, for the Necrons demonstrate no hesitation in exterminating populations that stand in their way. Yet within their own logic, it is not cruelty but inevitability. To resist is meaningless. To accept is to acknowledge the supremacy of their endurance. Their values are embedded in their very nature, silent, efficient, and unyielding. The division between civilian and military roles within Necron society is blurred to the point of indistinction. After biotransference, the traditional functions of civilian life cease to exist. There are no farmers, artisans, or merchants, for the Necrons require neither food nor trade. Their society no longer produces in the organic sense, it maintains. The closest equivalent to civilian roles are the maintenance constructs and scarab swarms that preserve tomb complexes, but even these are not truly separate classes of individuals. In essence, every Necron serves the military machine, either as a direct combatant or as a component of infrastructure. This reflects their cultural collapse into singularity. Where once they may have held families, communities, and civil institutions, now only dynasties, hierarchies, and armies remain. The concept of a civilian Necron does not exist, for all have been subsumed into the purpose of war and preservation. This convergence of technology and society creates a civilization that functions without the variables most others consider essential. They do not contend with hunger, disease, or reproduction. They do not build cities for habitation, only tombs for storage and strongholds for war. Their hierarchy is absolute, their values immovable, and their tools indistinguishable from their weapons. In this sense, Necron civilization is both alien and brutally simple. It is a machine for the perpetuation of itself, designed to endure until all others have vanished. Fame among the Necrons does not exist in the same manner it does for younger species. Their leaders are not celebrated through art, song, or commemoration, for their culture abandoned such forms of expression long ago. Instead, recognition is derived from the endurance of memory itself. Those overlords and kings whose names still echo across dynasties after millions of years are regarded as prominent not because of reverence, but because their actions shape the survival or resurgence of the Necron race. In this way, fame becomes a measure of permanence, fitting for a people who see time not in centuries but in cosmic eras. Foremost among these figures is Sharek, the last silent king. His title was not symbolic but literal. As the leader of the Triarch, he held supreme authority over the entire Necrontyr species at the time of biotransference. It was under his rule that the pact with the Catan was forged, and it was he who condemned his people to their immortal fate. For this decision he bore both the power of a saviour and the guilt of a destroyer. For although he delivered his race from the fragility of flesh, he also stripped them of their souls. His later choice to rebel against the Catan and shatter their dominion defined the future of the Necrons. When the war in heaven ended, Zarek ordered the Great Sleep, commanding the dynasties to retreat into stasis until the galaxy recovered from the devastation. His own departure into exile left the Necrons leaderless for millions of years, a silence that mirrors the title he carried. His memory persists as both a caution and a rallying point, for dynasties emerging in the current era still consider whether to follow the legacy of his decision or diverge into their own ambitions. Other leaders embody the diversity of dynastic power. Imhotep the Stormlord, pharaoh of the Sutek dynasty, stands as one of the most active and formidable overlords of the modern age. Known for his unmatched tactical brilliance, Imhotep has conducted campaigns that rival the greatest conquests of humanity's imperium. His strategy emphasizes precision and overwhelming control, often dismantling enemy forces without granting them opportunity for recovery. His rise illustrates the lingering capacity for individual Necron rulers to shape history, even within the framework of an ancient and seemingly immutable hierarchy. To study Imhotep is to recognize that the Necrons, though silent and machine-like in appearance, remain driven by ambition and intellect at their highest levels. Trazyn the Infinite represents another facet of Necron leadership. Unlike most overlords whose ambition is conquest, Trazyn's obsession lies with preservation and collection. His vaults contain artifacts, specimens, and even entire populations drawn from countless worlds, stored not out of cruelty but out of an enduring compulsion to curate the galaxy's history. To some, he is a thief. To others, a historian with methods so vast in scale that they reshape entire civilizations. His fame is not derived from military conquest, but from his peculiar role as custodian of knowledge, demonstrating that even within Necron society, variation of purpose exists. Orokin the Diviner, a cryptek of exceptional mastery, further exemplifies this. His manipulation of temporal mechanics allows him to glimpse possible futures and alter outcomes with precision that borders on predestination. Unlike warriors or overlords, Orokin's influence lies in the manipulation of destiny itself, often guiding dynasties through visions of what may occur. Figures such as Orokin show that power among the Necrons is not limited to those who command armies. It also rests with those who command the very fabric of reality. Beneath these leaders, the structure of Necron forces includes units that have gained recognition through both function and terror. The basic warrior, though stripped of identity, remains iconic in its skeletal uniformity, advancing without fear or hesitation. Immortals, with their enhanced durability and awareness, embody the veterans of their kind, capable of executing tactical operations with ruthless precision. Lichguards stand as guardians of overlords, wielding shields and war scythes with unwavering loyalty, their existence dedicated entirely to the preservation of dynastic rulers. Deathmarks, snipers who phase in and out of reality, embody assassination made into ritual, eliminating key targets before vanishing into the shadows of the battlefield. At the more extreme edge, destroyers serve as reminders of the psychological toll of biotransference, having surrendered all remaining humanity to become engines of destruction. Their very forms fused with heavy weaponry and driven by hatred for all life. Each of these units demonstrates that even within the apparent uniformity of the Necrons, divisions of purpose remain carefully defined. The war machines of the Necrons are no less infamous. Beyond the monolith, the Doomsday Arc projects devastation across planetary surfaces, its weaponry channeling energies capable of reducing entire armoured companies to molten debris. The Night Scythe serves as both fighter and transport, its crescent shape slicing through the void, while delivering warriors directly into battle through teleportation fields. At the pinnacle stand constructs such as the Tesseract Vault, prisons containing fragments of shattered Catan. These war engines weaponize divine remnants, unleashing energies that defy comprehension while barely maintaining control over the star gods within. Such creations are not merely military assets. They are testaments to the Necrons' capacity to bind and wield powers that once enslaved them. To face such war machines is to confront not only superior firepower, but also the memory of a species that has survived the wrath of gods themselves. Behavioral tendencies among the Necrons reflect the duality of their existence. At the lowest levels, their warriors exhibit machine-like obedience, devoid of hesitation, panic, or self-preservation instincts. This makes them implacable foes, for they cannot be broken by fear or fatigue. Yet at higher levels of awareness, Necrons retain traits from their mortal pasts. Overlords demonstrate ambition, pride, and cunning. Cryptechs display curiosity and obsession with knowledge. Destroyers manifest an almost pathological hatred of the living. These tendencies reveal that the biotransference did not erase individuality entirely, but stratified it, preserving more within those of higher station. The result is a society where behavior is dictated not only by function, but by the degree of selfhood one retained. This division mirrors their hierarchy. The more powerful and influential a Necron, the more of their old self remains to guide their decisions. Rituals within Necron society are few, for they abandoned religion and most cultural traditions when they rejected their mortality. Yet certain practices endure, often tied to their dynasties. The awakening of tomb complexes follows a strict sequence of activation, carried out as if it were ceremony, though its purpose is entirely functional. The preservation of relics, whether artifacts of the Necron tier or trophies from conquests, often takes on ritualistic overtones, particularly in the hands of figures like Trazyn. Even the act of biotransference itself, though long past, remains a central cultural memory, recalled in both reverence and resentment. To the Necrons, rituals are not acts of faith, but reenactments of control, reminders of the order that defines their existence. Their ethics are equally distinct. Concepts such as mercy or compassion are absent, replaced by pragmatism and the prioritization of dynastic survival. Yet they are not without codes. Loyalty to one's dynasty is paramount, and betrayal is regarded with absolute severity. The hierarchy demands respect, and rulers are rarely challenged openly, for authority is embedded not only in custom, but in the very systems that sustain the Necron's existence. Where ethics emerge, they do so in terms of function, the duty of guardians to protect, the responsibility of cryptechs to preserve knowledge, the expectation of warriors to obey. These are not moral constructs, but operational necessities framed as cultural constants. Internal divisions within Necron society can be understood as castes, though they are less flexible than those of organic civilizations. At the base are warriors, stripped of individuality. Above them are immortals and specialized castes such as Lichguard or Deathmarks, each defined by function. Nobles, lords, and overlords retain selfhood and authority, directing entire dynasties. Cryptechs occupy a parallel caste, not defined by command but by their mastery of science and sorcery. Destroyers form a unique and tragic caste, separated by their obsession and viewed with disdain even by their peers, yet tolerated for their effectiveness. At the apex, Pharaons and Silent Kings embody the ultimate authority. This stratification is rigid, a reflection of their ancient culture carried into immortality, where one's place is predetermined and unchanging. Social mobility ceased with biotransference. A warrior cannot rise to overlord, for the fragments of their soul are insufficient. In this way, their society mirrors their technology, unchanging, eternal, and absolute. These elements together define the Necrons not merely as a military power, but as a civilization fossilized in perfection. Their leaders exemplify both ambition and memory. Their units embody function refined beyond mortal limits. Their tendencies reveal fragments of individuality bound within machine forms, and their rituals and divisions preserve the order that sustains them. To encounter the Necrons is to witness a people who abandoned life to escape death, only to become something that transcends both. Their presence in the galaxy is not an anomaly, but a reminder that endurance, taken to its furthest extreme, becomes indistinguishable from inevitability. The Adeptus Administratum, as the immense bureaucratic organ of the Imperium, processes information about alien civilizations less as scientific curiosities and more as variables to be weighed in matters of taxation, military projection, and planetary control. In parallel, the Adeptus Mechanicus approaches the Necrons with an entirely different lens, that of techno-archaeological obsession, suspicion, and sometimes religious awe. When these two institutions cross-reference their reports, tensions surface, because the Necrons confound both sets of categories. Their technological systems are neither replicable within Imperial paradigms, nor entirely explicable within the language of the machine cult's mysteries, and their political behaviours often defy administratum precedent in the cataloguing of Xenos empires. The earliest fragments of administratum reports dealing with Necron activity are often retrospective, compiled only after an awakening tomb world erupted in violence. These documents carry a distinctly bureaucratic tone. Lists of planetary resource losses, records of guard regimental deployment, tallies of civilian casualties. They classify Necrons first as a logistical challenge, second as a military threat, and only distantly as a species with internal politics worth noting. This contrasts strongly with Mechanicus documents, which instead highlight the architecture of the tomb complexes, the anomalous properties of Necron alloys, and the untranslatable hieroglyphics carved into structures that predate the Great Crusade. For the Mechanicus, the Necrons represent both a puzzle and a theological danger, for their machines move and think with apparent autonomy, without any visible sign of the Omnissiah's blessing. In certain epochs, the Administratum and Mechanicus found their impressions colliding during joint operations. A telling example lies in the rediscovery of Sanctuary 101, where the Adepta Sororitas convent was annihilated in one of the most devastating Necron assaults recorded in the early Imperial timeline. The Administratum treated the event as a matter of planetary classification, striking the world from its standard charts and listing it as interdicted. The Mechanicus, however, filed overlapping records detailing the quantum anomalies found within the ruined landscape, and petitioned to retain limited survey rights, despite the Sisters' destruction. To the Administratum, the survivors' testimonies spoke of a hostile, irredeemable Xenos force. To the Mechanicus, the attack was proof of a civilization whose technology bent known laws of physics. Both reports were preserved in parallel without full reconciliation, creating a bureaucratic split that would become characteristic of Imperial knowledge regarding the Necrons. Where politics emerges between the institutions, it often does so in the form of disagreements about classification and access. The Administratum, charged with defending the Imperium's narrative of stability, prefers to downplay the scale of Necron civilization. In many Imperial archives, Necron tomb worlds are listed under the same rubric as orc infestations, or Tyranid splinter fleet incursions, hazardous, but containable with sufficient force. This minimizes civilian panic and maintains the impression that the Emperor's dominion is not threatened by ancient powers rising from beneath the galactic crust. The Adeptus Mechanicus contests such categorization, arguing that Necrons represent not merely an infestation, but a technological supremacy that undermines the very foundations of Imperial dogma. The Mechanicus has repeatedly sought to elevate Necrons in priority threat registers, lobbying for restricted Magos delegations to be assigned to tomb world observation. This is resisted by Administratum clerks, who fear that granting such status would imply parity between the Imperium and the Xenos, a conclusion considered politically destabilizing. Conflicts between the two institutions can escalate to violence, particularly when Mechanicus expeditions trespass into Administratum-controlled quarantine zones. On more than one occasion, Skitarii forces have been dispatched under Mechanicus command to recover Necron artifacts only to be intercepted by Imperial Guard units acting under Administratum sanction. Such incidents are rarely publicized, but the archives suggest that negotiations often resolve in the Mechanicus being allowed to extract limited relics in exchange for guarantees of secrecy. The Administratum, pragmatic to its core, prefers to avoid prolonged intra-imperial disputes that could weaken the outward image of unity. There are also rare cases of cooperation typically forced by circumstances. During the Damnos campaign, when the Necrons emerged in force, both Administratum and Mechanicus operatives were compelled to pool resources with the Ultramarines to understand the scale of the awakening. The Administratum supplied logistical support, evacuation routes, and the bureaucratic frameworks to classify Damnos as lost, while the Mechanicus catalogued the weapon discharges and material fragments for later study. The arrangement was not harmonious, but it demonstrated that both organs could act in parallel when the Necron threat exceeded the ability of either to manage alone. The cooperation was tactical, however, not strategic. Each side maintained its own archives and interpretations, refusing to share raw data except under duress. In terms of agreements, what exists are less treaties with the Necrons themselves, since the Imperium refuses to acknowledge any Xenos polity as a legitimate negotiating partner, and more tacit internal contracts between Administratum and Mechanicus offices on how to frame Necron data. One such standing agreement is the use of euphemistic terminology in Imperial records. Administratum documents often substitute unknown Xenos automata or archaic machine constructs in place of the direct term Necrons, a linguistic maneuver that dilutes the perceived scale of the civilization. The Mechanicus accepts these euphemisms for public documents, but maintains encrypted data vaults where the term Necronter is still employed, suggesting a deeper awareness of their origins. The arrangement allows both institutions to maintain appearances while pursuing their own agendas. Politically, the Necrons occupy an ambiguous position in the Imperium's strategic calculus. For the Administratum, they are an intractable nuisance that complicates resource allocation and undermines planetary security. Their awakenings often coincide with planetary crises that strain tithing schedules, disrupt trade, and necessitate expensive military interventions. For the Mechanicus, however, they are both rivals and potential exemplars. There is evidence that certain radical sects within the machine cult believe that Necron mastery of material science and energy manipulation represents the closest living model of what the Omnissiah's true technology might be. Such views are heretical by orthodox standards, but they persist in the darker corners of Forge World research cells. Thus, the Necrons exert a polarizing influence, bureaucratically minimized on one side and obsessively magnified on the other. The politics between these organs also extend to secrecy in relation to the Inquisition. Some Administratum clerks, fearing reprisal for underestimating the Necron threat, deliberately misfile reports to prevent inquisitorial discovery. Meanwhile, Mechanicus factions sometimes overstate the danger in order to justify larger research grants or expeditionary fleets. This uneven reporting means that the Imperium's collective knowledge of the Necrons remains fragmented, distorted by institutional rivalries as much as by the Necrons' own inscrutability. The result is a paradox, an empire that spans 1,000,000 worlds, yet still debates whether the Necrons are a localized anomaly or a galactic-scale civilization reasserting itself. Through these bureaucratic and political maneuvers, the Administratum and Mechanicus illustrate the Imperium's struggle to frame the Necrons within human categories of governance and theology. One reduces them to logistical problems, the other elevates them to techno-religious enigmas. Between these two poles, the true scale of the Necron Empire remains partially concealed, not only by the Necron's own cryptic nature, but also by the Imperium's inability to produce a unified narrative. This dissonance ensures that politically the Necrons remain underestimated in public doctrine, even as private archives testify to their profound threat. The recorded wars between the Necrons and the Imperium of Man are unevenly documented, often reconstructed after the fact through battlefield remnants, survivor accounts, and Mechanicus analysis of energy discharge residues. Despite the fragmentary nature of these sources, a clear picture emerges of the Necron approach to war. It is precise, overwhelming, and designed to extinguish resistance with minimal expenditure of resources. Unlike orc hordes, whose attacks can be predicted through mass mobilization or tyrannid incursions, which manifest as biological storms, Necron assaults appear suddenly, often without clear warning. Entire regiments have been destroyed before administratum clerks were able to classify the threat, and worlds have been stripped of life in a span of days. One of the earliest fully recorded Necron campaigns was the massacre at Sanctuary 101. The Adepta Sororitas maintained a convent on the world, believed secure in its isolation. Without warning, Necron phalanxes emerged from beneath the planet's crust, their advance heralded only by the flickering of noosphere signals and the sudden failure of local defense systems. The Sisters mounted a disciplined resistance, but they were systematically annihilated. Orbital augurs later detected geometric patterns of devastation on the surface, suggesting that the Necrons not only fought to kill, but also sought to erase all memory of their victims. Administratum reports filed the world as interdicted, while Mechanicus analyses noted the anomalous radiation signatures consistent with Gauss weaponry. The event set the tone for all subsequent encounters: abrupt emergence, methodical slaughter, and strategic withdrawal before Imperial reinforcements could arrive. Another crucial engagement occurred on Damnos, an Imperial mining world of strategic importance. The Necrons emerged in force, disrupting planetary infrastructure and paralyzing defense networks. Imperial Guard units were deployed but found themselves hopelessly outmatched by the resilience and firepower of the Necron legions. The Ultramarines under Captain Cato Sicarius were forced to intervene directly. The campaign revealed the Necrons' capacity for attritional endurance, as the Ultramarines' finest tactics could not prevent Damnos from eventually being overrun. Imperial records emphasize the sheer inevitability of the Necron advance. No matter how many warriors were shattered, their bodies self-repaired or phased out, only for replacements to arrive in flawless formations. Although Damnos was later reclaimed temporarily by Imperial forces, Mechanicus observers concluded that the planet itself remained at risk of further awakening, its crust riddled with dormant tomb complexes. The battle for the Pariah Nexus is among the most significant campaigns in recent history. Here, the Necrons demonstrated not only their martial precision, but also their ability to manipulate the very fabric of the materium. The Nexus, a zone where the immaterium is suppressed, left Imperial forces deprived of psychic abilities and astropathic communication. Space Marine chapters, guardsmen, and even inquisitorial strike teams found themselves cut off, forced to fight without the warp-based assets on which Imperial warfare depends. The Necrons' mastery of null technology turned the battlefield into an asymmetric trap. Imperial psychers collapsed into catatonia, while Necron forces advanced with unbroken discipline. The campaign remains unresolved, as the Nexus continues to defy Imperial reclamation, marking it as a symbol of Necron dominance over both material and immaterial domains. Other notable engagements include the incursions into the Vidar sector, the Cronus campaign during the Dawn of War conflicts, and repeated clashes around the Halo stars, where explorers reported entire fleets vanishing in moments. Each battle reinforces the same conclusion. The Necrons select their theatres with care, avoid overextension, and strike with overwhelming technological superiority. Necron battle doctrine is characterized by an absence of haste. Unlike orcs, who thrive on chaotic momentum, or the tyrannids, whose swarms consume worlds through relentless numbers, Necron warfare unfolds like a ritual. Phalanxes of warriors advance with machine precision, maintaining formation regardless of losses. The discipline is absolute, suggesting centralized command structures, often directed by overlords or cryptechs who monitor the battle in real time. The core weapon of Necron infantry is the Gauss Flare, a device that strips matter layer by layer at the molecular level. Against infantry, it disassembles flesh and armor alike, leaving only skeletal remains. Against armored vehicles, it erodes plating until engines collapse into dust. This efficiency gives Necron squads the ability to dismantle targets far beyond their apparent scale. reducing battle tanks and bastions with the same calm inevitability. Complementing this are heavier weapons such as Gauss cannons, Tesla arcs, and particle beamers, all designed to annihilate concentrations of resistance with minimal warning. In addition to sheer firepower, the Necrons employ teleportation and phase technologies with strategic cunning. Units often emerge directly behind Imperial lines, bypassing fortifications entirely. Entire monoliths, a form of mobile fortress and transport, descend onto the battlefield, disgorging fresh phalanxes while projecting shielding matrices. To Imperial tacticians, this renders conventional defense planning nearly useless, as no line is secure when Necron reinforcements can materialize at will. Necron war machines magnify this style. The monolith, the Doomsday Ark, and the obelisk function less as individual tanks and more as battlefield anchors. They provide fire support, troop deployment, and psychological domination simultaneously. Titans of the Collegia Titanica, accustomed to towering over battlefields, have found themselves challenged or destroyed by Necron engines, whose energy outputs eclipse those of plasma reactors. The Damnos campaign remains the most illustrative of Necron battlefield tendencies. Mechanicus observers noted that Necron forces exhibited no supply lines, no visible logistical strain, and no morale fluctuations. Where Imperial armies fought with valor but faltered under attrition, the Necrons absorbed losses without alteration to their tempo. Even when Ultramarine strike teams destroyed Necron command nodes, new overlords emerged from stasis crypts, continuing the battle with identical strategies as though nothing had changed. This suggests either pre-programmed contingency planning or an ability to transmit command authority instantaneously across vast distances. On Sanctuary 101, details from survivor fragments indicated that Necron forces employed deliberate terror tactics despite their mechanical demeanor. The Sisters of Battle reported auditory phenomena, metallic hymns echoing through the corridors, the synchronized sound of thousands of warriors advancing in perfect cadence. The psychological impact was devastating, designed to erode hope before the final clash. Such tactics reveal that the Necrons, though often described as emotionless, understand fear as a weapon and deploy it as precisely as their Gauss weaponry. The Pariah Nexus adds a unique dimension to Necron strategy. Here, the suppression of the warp rendered entire categories of Imperial warfare obsolete. Librarians and navigators became liabilities, unable to function. This demonstrates not only a mastery of material combat, but also an awareness of the Imperium's metaphysical infrastructure. By stripping away warp access, the Necrons demonstrated that they could dismantle not just armies, but the very pillars of Imperial civilization, communication, travel, and spiritual cohesion. Across these engagements, one tactical constant stands out. The Necrons rarely commit to battles of annihilation unless the strategic objective demands it. In many recorded wars, Necron forces withdraw once a tomb world is secured, a relic is recovered, or their presence is revealed. This suggests that their goals are narrower than total conquest, at least in the present era. However, the ease with which they conduct these limited campaigns implies that, should their dynasties awaken fully and act in unison, few forces in the galaxy could resist them. The wars and battles recorded against the Necrons reveal them as a force defined by inevitability. Their technology ensures parity is never achieved. Their formations guarantee precision. Their objectives remain inscrutable, but always efficiently pursued. For the Administratum, these wars translate into records of planetary losses and disrupted tithes. For the Mechanicus, they are windows into a civilization whose mastery of material science surpasses anything the Imperium has achieved. For the soldiers on the ground, they are encounters with an enemy who neither tires nor hesitates, whose advance cannot be slowed by courage or faith alone. Though fragmentary, the tapestry of recorded Necron wars across the galaxy reveals patterns of emergence, conquest, and sudden withdrawal. The Administratum's filing systems categorize them as anomalous Xenos hostilities, often cross-referenced under suppression orders from sector authorities who lack the capacity to describe the scale of threat. The Adeptus Mechanicus, more methodical in its observations, stores these records as case studies in forbidden technologies, quarantined within sealed noospheres or restricted data vaults. Both institutions agree on one point. Wherever the Necrons rise, Imperial forces struggle to mount coherent resistance. One prominent conflict is the Orphean War, a campaign that demonstrated the terrifying scope of Necron military organization when a dynasty mobilized at scale. The Celtic dynasty, under the command of Overlord Imhotep the Stormlord, launched a vast offensive through the Orpheus sector. Entire subsectors fell in rapid succession, their garrisons swept aside by disciplined phalanxes and devastating orbital bombardments. Administratum tallies estimated billions of human lives extinguished or displaced, with tithes collapsing across multiple sectors. Despite Imperial counterattacks, including the deployment of several Space Marine chapters, Imhotep's forces advanced inexorably. Only when the Stormlord's attentions were drawn elsewhere did the Necron tide relent, leaving behind hollowed worlds and shattered economies. For the Administratum, the Orphean War was a ledger of deficit. For the Mechanicus, it was a trove of battlefield observations regarding dynastic coordination. The Cronus campaign is another example of the Necrons' capacity to manipulate Imperial expectations. Cronus was contested ground between multiple factions, including Imperial Guard regiments, the Blood Ravens chapter, and Tau Empire expeditionary forces. Beneath the planet's crust lay a dormant tomb world, which once stirred, unleashed legions of Necrons into the surface war. Imperial records emphasize how quickly the conflict shifted from conventional planetary warfare to desperate survival once the Necrons revealed themselves. Administratum notes classify the campaign as a failure of reconnaissance, while Mechanicus commentary points to the underestimated scale of subterranean stasis complexes, many of which remained active even after apparent Imperial victories. The Perseus Vale incidents reveal a subtler form of Necron warfare. Rogue trader expeditions and Mechanicus explorators reported entire fleets lost in moments, their last transmissions describing green fire, impossible geometries, and the sudden collapse of void shields. Though no full-scale campaigns were launched in the region, these incidents contributed to the growing recognition that the Necrons could annihilate fleets as efficiently as they destroyed armies. Administratum cartographers marked the Perseus Vale as interdicted, while the Mechanicus sealed their reports with higher-than-standard classification protocols, citing anomalous energy discharges that suggested stellar-scale power manipulation. The Gidrim Rebellion illustrates another form of aftermath. Localized uprisings destabilized by Necron interference. Records indicate that human rebels on the agri-world Gidrim were moments from declaring independence when Necron forces emerged, cutting down both loyalists and traitors alike. The Administratum interpreted this as a punishment inflicted by alien hands, a cosmic reinforcement of Imperial dominion. The Mechanicus, however, noted the precision of Necron strikes, which dismantled power grids, silos, and relay stations rather than population centers, leaving the planet crippled but intact. Across these and many other minor records, skirmishes in the Halo stars, unexplained silences in the Eastern Fringe, the emergence of Necron pylons in the Perea Nexus, the same conclusion is evident. The Necrons wage war in patterns designed for maximum impact and minimal waste. The aftermath of Necron wars extends far beyond the battlefield. Administratum data clerks report systemic disruptions to sector economies, as tithe quotas collapse in the wake of annihilated populations and ruined infrastructure. A single Necron awakening can erase centuries of Imperial investment in colonization, mining, or agricultural cultivation. Where the Orcs or Tyranids consume and move on, the Necrons leave silence. Planets depopulated, cities reduced to geometrical ruins, and supply chains permanently severed. Culturally, these wars erode morale across Imperial domains. Pilgrims whisper of soulless legions who rise from the earth without warning, while guardsmen circulate fragmented survivor accounts that describe the futility of firing upon enemies who repair themselves as fast as they are struck down. Administratum censors attempt to suppress such reports, categorizing them as unfounded panic, yet the very need for suppression betrays their growing prevalence. For the Adeptus Mechanicus, Aftermath takes on a different form. Each Necron battlefield is treated as a forbidden reliquary, littered with fragments of gorse coils, necrodermis shards, and scarab husks. Explorator teams compete to recover even the smallest relic, though their efforts are frequently frustrated by Necron retrieval units, which phase back onto the battlefield to reclaim or erase any surviving technology. When fragments are secured, they often defy analysis, resisting dissection by plasma cutters, or collapsing into inert dust when exposed to probing fields. These outcomes frustrate the Mechanicus, but also deepen its fascination, reinforcing the belief that Necron science operates on principles far beyond sanctioned human knowledge. The Adeptus Administratum interprets Necron wars through the lens of stability and control. To its functionaries, every conflict is reduced to columns of loss, disrupted tithes, and destabilized sectors. The Necrons are classified as a catastrophic but irregular threat, unpredictable in appearance, impossible to negotiate with, and nearly impossible to eradicate. Administratum conclusions emphasize the futility of direct confrontation and recommend avoidance where possible. They also stress the political necessity of containment, ensuring that reports of Necron resurgence do not spread unchecked and weaken faith in the Emperor's dominion. The Adeptus Mechanicus views the Necrons in almost the opposite manner. Where the Administratum sees disruption, the Mechanicus sees revelation. Each war provides another opportunity to observe energy sources that eclipse plasma, materials that rival or surpass adamantium, and computational matrices that coordinate armies with impossible efficiency. The Mechanicus recognizes the Necrons as both rivals and exemplars, a civilization whose mastery of science represents what humanity might achieve unbound by dogma. Yet this admiration is tempered by a recognition of existential danger. The Necrons' capacity to silence the warp, as seen in the Pariah Nexus, threatens not only Imperial war-making but also the core mechanisms of the Imperium's survival: interstellar travel, astropathic relay, and the Emperor's psychic beacon. Together, the Administratum and Mechanicus form a dual record. One describes the Necrons as a political and logistical calamity, the other as a technological riddle bordering on divinity. Both institutions agree that Necron wars cannot be ignored. Each conflict leaves scars on the Imperium's body politic and psychic fabric, scars that even victory cannot heal. While Administratum scribes recommend interdiction and suppression, and Mechanicus Magii recommend further study, the unspoken consensus is clear. The Necrons are not merely another Xenos race, but a dormant empire whose reawakening may render all Imperial efforts irrelevant. The Inquisition, unlike the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus, does not maintain open archives of Necron activity. Its records are layered beneath seals, encrypted across hidden data vaults, or dispersed through compartmentalized cells to prevent unauthorized access. To the Ordo Xenos, the Necrons represent not merely another hostile species, but a profound destabilizing force, one whose existence undermines sanctioned histories, one whose technology threatens to unravel the foundations of the Imperium, and one whose very nature calls into question the supremacy of mankind in the galaxy. For centuries, Inquisitors debated whether the scattered reports of mechanical warriors rising from the ground were exaggerations or misattributions of other threats. It was only after the massacre at Sanctuary 101 that consensus began to form. Survivor accounts from the Adeptus Sororitas, corroborated by orbital auger traces and Mechanicus energy scans, forced the Inquisition to recognize the Necrons as a unique species. Unlike orcs or tyranids, who could be classified by biological markers, the Necrons appeared entirely artificial. This raised immediate questions. Were they automata, constructs of another intelligence, or a machine race independent of organic origins? The Ordo Xenos compiled the fragments into dossiers that described the Necrons as soulless warriors of metal. The absence of warp signatures around them heightened alarm. Psychers reported that Necron presence induced sensations of emptiness, as though the Immaterium itself recoiled. This trait, now recognized as a defining feature of the Necrons' necrodermis bodies and associated null fields, was seen as doubly dangerous. First, because it rendered psychers ineffective in their presence, and second, because it suggested a connection to the ancient mythologies of the Catan, entities known to consume the souls of mortals. For an Imperium dependent on the warp for its cohesion, a foe that nullifies it is uniquely catastrophic. The Ordo Xenos compiled the fragments into dossiers that described the Necrons as soulless warriors of metal. The absence of warp signatures around them heightened alarm. Psychers reported that Necron presence induced sensations of emptiness, as though the Immaterium itself recoiled. This trait, now recognized as a defining feature of the Necrons' necrodermis bodies and associated null fields, was seen as doubly dangerous. First, because it rendered psychers ineffective in their presence, and second, because it suggested a connection to the ancient mythologies of the Catan, entities known to consume the souls of mortals. For an Imperium dependent on the warp for its cohesion, a foe that nullifies it is uniquely catastrophic. The Ordo Xenos maintains multiple levels of classification regarding Necron encounters. At the lowest tier, they are described as Xenos automatons, a vague description useful for local commanders. At higher tiers, they are identified as part of dynastic structures, with named overlords and recognized strategies. At the highest tier, restricted to senior inquisitors, the Necrons are acknowledged as the remnants of an ancient galactic empire predating mankind itself. This final layer is rarely shared outside the Ordo, for it collides directly with the Ecclesiarchy's sanctioned history of human primacy and the Emperor's eternal dominion. Where the Administratum emphasizes logistics and the Mechanicus emphasizes technology, the Inquisition emphasizes existential consequence. Its archives describe three primary impressions. The first is the temporal scale of the Necrons. Unlike any other enemy, they do not measure campaigns in years or centuries. They awaken after millennia of dormancy, pursue objectives whose origins stretch back to a prehistoric war against the Old Ones, and then return to silence. This timelessness makes them resistant to human strategy. The Inquisition recognizes that even when a Necron force is defeated, it may simply be delaying its return by a few hundred or thousand years, a pause meaningless to a machine race that perceives epochs as moments. The second is the warp nullification effect. Reports from psychers and sanctioned astropaths describe the Necrons not simply as resistant to the warp, but as active voids within it. Within their domains, the warp grows thin or absent, undermining the Emperor's light itself. The Inquisition views this as more than a battlefield complication. It is an ideological threat. Imperial faith rests upon the immaterial power of the Emperor, upon the sanctity of psychic guidance. A foe that erases this foundation destabilizes not only combat operations, but the very legitimacy of the Imperium's spiritual architecture. The second is the warp nullification effect. Reports from psychers and sanctioned astropaths describe the Necrons not simply as resistant to the warp, but as active voids within it. Within their domains, the warp grows thin or absent, undermining the Emperor's light itself. The Inquisition views this as more than a battlefield complication. It is an ideological threat. Imperial faith rests upon the immaterial power of the Emperor, upon the sanctity of psychic guidance. A foe that erases this foundation destabilizes not only combat operations, but the very legitimacy of the Imperium's spiritual architecture. Within the Inquisition, not all Ordos perceive the Necrons equally. The Ordo Xenos regards them as its primary concern. Their dossiers emphasize continuous monitoring of suspected tomb worlds, the containment of technological artifacts, and the suppression of knowledge that could destabilize Imperial doctrine. Many Ordo Xenos Inquisitors advocate for exterminatus-level responses to any confirmed tomb awakening, regardless of planetary value, on the grounds that suppression is preferable to escalation. The Ordo Malleus, usually focused on demonic threats, nonetheless registers interest in the Necrons due to their interaction with the warp. Their capacity to negate the Immaterium raises questions of whether they could be wielded as allies, an idea quickly discarded as heretical but still whispered in speculative reports. The Order Malleus also notes that Necron activity disrupts chaos incursions. Entire warbands of the traitor legions have been annihilated by Necron forces with as little effort as they apply to Imperial armies. Some inquisitors wonder whether this hostility might be exploited, though others warn that to imagine the Necrons as allies is to misunderstand their complete indifference to all organic life. The Order Hereticus rarely engages directly with Necron affairs, but it does monitor the cultural and political consequences of their appearance. Where the populace learns of Necron awakenings, fear often turns to heterodoxy, with whispers that the Emperor cannot protect them from soulless gods. The Order Hereticus ensures that such rumours are purged, associating them with heretical cults to justify exterminations. Thus, while not primarily concerned with the Necrons themselves, the Order Hereticus ensures that their shadow does not unravel the Imperium from within. Beyond formal analyses, inquisitorial reports include qualitative impressions from interrogations of survivors. These accounts are bleakly consistent. Guardsmen speak of firing until barrels melted, only to watch their enemies rise again without alteration. Sororitas records describe hymns silenced by mechanical cadence. Even Astartes report disquiet, noting that to fight the Necrons is to fight inevitability itself. The Inquisition catalogues these impressions not for tactical insight but to understand morale degradation. They recognise that the Necrons erode not only flesh but willpower, spreading despair across regiments and populations alike. The Inquisition also takes special note of psycho-reactions. Many describe Necrons as absences, entities without souls, whose presence strips the world of psychic resonance. Some psychers collapse into seizures when Necrons approach, while others describe the sensation of drowning in silence. The Ordo Xenos considers these reports crucial evidence that the Necrons represent an ontological threat to the warp itself. Taken together, the Inquisition's impression of the Necrons is one of profound caution. They are viewed not as a temporary adversary but as a galactic constant, a civilization older than mankind, patient in ways humanity cannot fathom, and equipped with technologies that make a mockery of the Imperium's achievements. Their ability to erase history, silence psychers, and operate beyond mortal timescales places them in a category distinct from all other foes. The Inquisition's final impression, rarely spoken but implied in its sealed files, is that the Necrons embody the possibility of humanity's irrelevance. Where the Ecclesiarchy preaches human destiny, and the Mechanicus searches for the Omnissiah, the Necrons represent a parallel truth, that another race has already achieved what mankind seeks, and has chosen not to guide or uplift, but to enslave or erase. For this reason, the Inquisition's impression of the Necrons is not simply fear, it is existential dread. Not dread of defeat in battle, but dread of recognition. That the Imperium is not the galaxy's inheritor, but merely an interlude in the long slumber of the Necron dynasties. The Inquisition's internal records on the Necrons are characterized not by their clarity, but by their irregularities. Unlike other foes of the Imperium, whose wars can be chronicled in linear fashion and tied to the movement of fleets or crusades, the Necrons defy such categorization. The Inquisition has long noted that accounts of their battles contain striking contradictions, unexplained disappearances, and outright impossibilities. These anomalies, more than the engagements themselves, have formed the backbone of inquisitorial concern, for they imply that the Necrons operate according to principles still opaque to even the most diligent archivists. One of the most consistent anomalies is the absence of complete records. Campaigns that involve Necron forces often appear in Imperial archives only as fragmented entries. A guard regiment may record the opening stages of combat with mechanical warriors, detailing extraordinary resilience and impossible weaponry, only for the trail of data to end abruptly after days or weeks of reporting. The remaining gaps are filled not with coherent follow-up but with silence, as though the conflict itself were erased. In certain cases, entire regiments are missing from census records after such encounters, their banners and designations struck out as though they never existed. Inquisitors investigating these discrepancies often conclude that administratum scriveners have been instructed to purge the data, but the depth of the erasure suggests an intentional effort at higher levels, one designed not merely to conceal losses, but to eliminate all trace that a Necron engagement took place. More troubling are the contradictions found in the testimonies that survive. Different survivors of the same battle often report entirely different experiences. One unit may describe endless ranks of metallic infantry advancing in disciplined silence, while another insists they faced only a small contingent that vanished once the first wave was repelled. In other accounts, commanders speak of immense war engines blotting out the skies, constructs that defy categorization, yet no physical evidence remains after the conflict ends. These inconsistencies cannot be fully explained as simple errors of memory under duress. Some Inquisitors suspect deliberate manipulation of records by Necron technology, an ability to distort perception or to phase elements of battle in and out of reality itself. A frequently noted pattern is the sudden disappearance of Necron forces mid-conflict. Where orcs fight until broken and Tyranids until slaughtered, Necrons have been observed to disengage without warning, phasing out of existence as if the entire war had been no more than a temporary demonstration. This phenomenon leaves Imperial forces confused, their victories hollow, for there is no wreckage to study, no corpses to autopsy, and no trophies to confirm what has been fought. The Inquisition interprets this as both tactical and psychological. Tactical in that it allows the Necrons to conserve their forces indefinitely, returning at a later time of their own choosing. Psychological in that it erodes the certainty of Imperial commanders who can never be sure whether a battle won was in fact a battle concluded. The anomalies are not limited to combat outcomes but extend to planetary consequences. Whole sectors bear scars of engagements never recorded in official annals. The Inquisition has documented worlds where cities lie abandoned without sign of bombardment, populations erased without evidence of mass death. In other cases, technological signatures are detected from orbit that have no correlation to known weapons, but fade as soon as Imperial ships approach. Even Mechanicus augurs return with contradictory data, reporting energy spikes beyond known classifications that vanish on second sweep. To the Inquisition, these anomalies suggest that Necron warfare does not operate within human comprehension of conflict but along parameters alien to the very idea of war. Sealed reports within the Ordo Xenos describe more extreme cases. On one shrine world, all records of a 3-year campaign simply cease, replaced in administratum archives with unrelated agricultural tallies. Inquisitorial investigators found evidence of mass graves, unfamiliar architecture half buried in desert sands, and fragments of necrodermis alloy. The surviving population spoke only in broken phrases of metal gods that had vanished one night without warning. No public record of this world's ordeal exists. Its name is withheld even from most Inquisitors, the entire campaign sealed under triple cipher. Another report describes a chapter of the Adeptus Astartes deployed against a Xenos uprising, only for all subsequent references to that chapter to vanish from every source, as though its genocide and history were erased. The rare fragments that remain, retrieved through Mechanicus back channels, suggest that the chapter encountered a Necron dynasty in full force. Whether it was destroyed or simply written out of existence remains unknown. Perhaps the most disturbing anomalies are those which suggest temporal irregularities. Several Inquisitors have noted that reports of Necron sightings predate the Imperium itself. Colonization archives from the Dark Age of technology include descriptions of machine entities uncannily similar to modern Necron warriors. Even scattered Xenos records preserved from defeated Eldar enclaves describe battles against metal legions, tens of millions of years old. The implication is that the Necrons have not simply returned from dormancy, but have always been present, intermittently surfacing throughout history. If true, this would mean Imperial understanding of their resurgence is incomplete. and what is described as awakening may instead be a carefully orchestrated cycle of appearances spanning millennia. The Inquisition further records anomalies in the aftermath of battles. Survivors often speak of landscapes altered in unnatural ways, mountain ranges cut with surgical precision, entire oceans boiled into glass, or forests petrified as if time itself were accelerated upon them. These scars persist long after the Necrons vanish, serving as mute evidence of weapons that operate on principles far beyond human technology. Yet even these anomalies are inconsistent. On some worlds, the signs of war vanish almost entirely, as though the ground itself was restored to its prior state. Such reversals deepen suspicion that the Necrons not only wield destructive capabilities, but also manipulative ones, able to undo or rewrite the evidence of their presence. Inquisitorial sealed files contain multiple warnings regarding the unreliability of captured artifacts. Fragments of necrodermis retrieved from battlefields have been observed to deteriorate into inert matter without warning, while others resist all forms of analysis. In some cases, artifacts simply vanish from containment, leaving behind only data corruption in the records that tracked them. The Ordo Xenos concludes that Necron material cannot be trusted as static evidence, that it is part of a system of self-erasure designed to prevent humanity from advancing its understanding. This impression fuels theories that the Necrons anticipate human attempts at study and preemptively counter them at the level of the artifact itself. Inconsistencies also exist in population records following Necron campaigns. In multiple sealed cases, entire civilian populations have disappeared without corresponding casualties. On one mining world, 2 million workers were simply absent following a reported incursion. No bodies were discovered, no genetic residue left behind, only empty habitation structures and silent vox channels. Similar disappearances are recorded on agricultural and hive worlds, each carefully suppressed from public knowledge. Inquisitors speculate that these populations may have been harvested for purposes unknown, though some argue that the Necrons erase populations not for material, but for the elimination of witnesses, a strategy of silence on a civilizational scale. Even among Inquisitors, discussion of these anomalies is conducted with caution. To acknowledge them openly risks creating a picture of the Necrons as not only militarily superior, but ontologically manipulative, capable of reshaping history itself. Thus, many anomalies remain locked within sealed vaults, never shared beyond the narrower circle. Inquisitors who have attempted to present these findings to the wider Imperium are often silenced, their warnings dismissed as exaggeration or buried under censure. The Ordo recognizes that the very irregularity of Necron encounters undermines the stability of Imperial doctrine, which relies upon clear enemies and stable categories of threat. An enemy who cannot be consistently recorded is an enemy that cannot be contained. The cumulative impression from these anomalies is not merely that the Necrons are powerful, but that they deliberately obscure the truth of their operations. Battles are fought not simply to conquer or destroy, but to manipulate records, erase memory, and ensure that their presence remains ambiguous. The Inquisition has concluded that the Necrons may pursue a long campaign of obfuscation, ensuring that humanity never gains a coherent picture of their scale or intention. Wars are waged not for territory alone, but for control of history itself. In the end, the anomalies that litter inquisitorial files form a pattern of absence. Absence of records, absence of survivors, absence of wreckage, absence of certainty. Where other enemies leave scars that can be catalogued, the Necrons leave only confusion, erasure, and silence. For the Inquisition, this silence is more damning than any visible battlefield, for it suggests an adversary that has mastered not only war but memory, shaping the very archive upon which the Imperium depends. To confront the Necrons is thus not only to face a military threat, but to face the disintegration of the possibility of truth itself. Sealed Inquisition files dealing with the Necrons are among the most heavily restricted in the Imperium. Their access is layered with prohibitions and cipher locks, often requiring the authorization of multiple High Lords or their direct proxies. The secrecy is not merely for the sake of preserving military advantage, but because the material contained within undermines the core assumptions of the Imperium's history. These reports often describe events that conflict with established records, reveal disappearances on a civilizational scale, or hint at truths too destabilizing for general circulation. The aftermath of these encounters has consistently left Inquisitors with the impression that the Necrons are not merely a martial threat, but an existential one, targeting the coherence of human knowledge itself. One sealed dossier describes a frontier world designated as a mining hub during the early 38th millennium. Records state that the planet experienced a sudden loss of all communication with nearby systems. When a relief force finally arrived decades later, they found the world intact yet empty. Cities were uninhabited, equipment still operational, and infrastructure free of sabotage. The only signs of alteration were subterranean complexes discovered beneath former habitation zones, vast geometries of black metal unlike any human construction. The Ordo Xenos investigators who catalogued the site determined that these structures were not built during the Imperial occupation, but had emerged afterward, as if grown into place. No Necron presence was detected, yet the implication was clear. The population had been taken, and their world reshaped. The case was sealed after Mechanicus analysis suggested that the black metal structures had partially phased into surrounding rock strata, existing both within and outside material space. To preserve the stability of the sector, the Administratum simply declared the planet uninhabitable and struck it from colonization charts. Another file speaks of an Astartes chapter assigned to purge what was believed to be a heretical uprising on a shrine world in the Ultima Segmentum. Upon arrival, the chapter encountered organized resistance of a kind not matching any known Xenos. Survivors later described immense skeletal machines that struck with uncanny precision and dispersed before retaliation could occur. After several months, the chapter ceased transmission altogether. When Imperial reinforcements arrived, no trace of the chapter remained. Monuments to the Emperor had been reshaped into unfamiliar iconography, smooth pyramidal structures of stone and metal, their angles disturbing to the human eye. Within weeks of initial investigation, all physical evidence of these structures vanished, leaving only bare rock. The shrine world was declared to have suffered warp incursion, its surviving population relocated, and the record of the chapter sealed within Inquisition vaults. To this day, its heraldry is absent from official archives as if the chapter never existed. The suspicion lingers that the Necrons not only defeated them, but removed their memory from Imperial history. The aftermath of Necron campaigns often carries a quality of erasure rather than conquest. Unlike orcs, who leave battlefields littered with crude machines, or tyrannids, who strip worlds of biomass, the Necrons tend to vanish without residue. Survivors describe shattered armies and landscapes transformed, but when subsequent investigators arrive, they find little more than orderly terrain, stripped of wreckage as if the war had been undone. Inquisitors theorize that this is no accident but part of a larger strategy. By removing evidence, the Necrons deny the Imperium the ability to build a comprehensive record of their existence. Each campaign thus becomes an isolated mystery, a series of fragmented stories that never coalesce into a full history. The sealed reports are especially clear on one matter. The Necrons are selective in what they choose to preserve. On certain worlds, vast archives of human history have been discovered gutted, their data cores stripped of specific centuries or populations. What remains is intact, as though nothing was touched, yet gaps appear in the sequence, precise and deliberate. Some Inquisitors speculate that the Necrons are not simply waging war against humanity's present, but against its memory, pruning the record of its existence for reasons unknown. In such cases, the aftermath of battle is not defined by devastation, but by silence, a silence engineered to erase context itself. There are also indications within sealed files that some Necron dynasties employ methods of subjugation distinct from open war. A recovered report from an inquisitorial team in the Eastern Fringe describes a population that appeared to live under normal Imperial rule yet displayed unusual behaviours. Citizens operated machinery with ritualistic precision, avoided certain areas of their cities without explanation, and spoke of nocturnal presences that guided their labour. Investigation revealed hidden Necron structures embedded deep below the hive foundations, their purpose unclear. Before the team could escalate, all contact was lost, and the world was declared compliant without further inquiry. This report, preserved only in inquisitorial ciphers, suggested that the Necrons had achieved a form of hidden dominion, turning an Imperial population into unwitting subjects without firing a single shot. The aftermath in such cases leaves no scars visible to the administratum, only subtle patterns that betray a deeper control. Sealed accounts also reveal that Necron campaigns often coincide with disruptions in warp phenomena. Astropathic choirs attempting to monitor these conflicts frequently suffer interference, reporting visions of impossible geometries or sudden silences where the warp itself appears muted. In extreme cases, whole choirs are destroyed by psychic backlash when attempting to observe Necron operations. The Inquisition's analysis suggests that Necron technology interacts with the Immaterium in ways neither the Adeptus Astra Telepathica nor the Ordo Malleus can fully explain. The aftermath of these engagements often includes sectors of space where warp travel becomes erratic or impossible for centuries, creating dead zones that fracture Imperial logistics. This effect has forced the Inquisition to conclude that Necron campaigns extend beyond material war and into the strategic alteration of the warp itself, denying the Imperium its lifeblood of communication and travel. Among the most disturbing sealed files are those that imply the Necrons possess knowledge of humanity's future. Certain conflicts appear staged not for territorial gain, but to test specific Imperial responses. Fleets are drawn into ambushes that serve no immediate purpose, save to record how long Imperial ships take to react, or to observe how regiments deploy under pressure. In the aftermath, Necron forces disengage without pursuit, leaving behind no destruction of note. To the Inquisition, this suggests that some dynasties view humanity not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a subject to be studied, an experiment whose variables are carefully recorded across centuries. The implications of such intent are sealed not because they are uncertain, but because they are intolerable. To admit them openly would concede that the Imperium is not a sovereign power, but a specimen under observation. Final analysis from the Inquisition portrays the Necrons as a threat that transcends conventional warfare. The aftermath of their campaigns reveals a species not driven by hunger, reproduction, or the chaotic expansionism of other Xenos, but by goals bound to silence, erasure, and control. Where orcs generate disorder and tyrannids consume, the Necrons impose a form of absence, replacing complexity with void. Their wars end not with occupation, but with the removal of presence itself, of armies, populations, and even records. The Inquisition concludes that to face the Necrons is to confront an adversary that regards history as malleable, memory as a battlefield, and survival as something to be permitted only when it serves their inscrutable design. The cumulative impression of the sealed reports is that humanity does not fight the Necrons in the traditional sense. Instead, humanity is permitted encounters, staged and controlled by dynasties whose purposes are never disclosed. The aftermath of these engagements, erased populations, altered landscapes, silenced archives, suggests that each battle is only a fragment of a much larger project. The Inquisition warns, in its most restricted files, that the true war is not for territory or resources but for the continuity of humanity's existence within the galaxy's record. To lose against the Necrons may not mean annihilation but removal, a future in which humanity is not destroyed but unwritten. This final analysis remains locked within the deepest archives of the Inquisition. For while the Imperium can rally against enemies it can name and define, it cannot rally against erasure. The Necrons are therefore allowed to remain officially misunderstood, their wars categorized as isolated anomalies, their presence minimized. Yet within the sealed chambers of the Ordo Xenos, the truth is spoken plainly. The Necrons are not merely ancient foes returning from slumber. They are architects of silence, engineers of void, and masters of war whose greatest weapon is not the Gorse Flayer or the monolith, but the erasure of memory itself.